So you guys will see the Cedar Creek review prior for Bass Champs on Thursday. But I wanted to talk a little bit about something today. So I started pulling rods out of my rod box, kind of figuring out what I'm gonna carry with me, because we're gonna fish out. So Bass Champs is this Saturday and Sunday, 2 tournaments. The Fork tournament that got canceled due to weather is Sunday, and the regular Cedar Creek is on Saturday. And so we're gonna go in Terry's boat on Saturday. We'll go in my boat on Sunday, but that turns me into a co-angler on Saturday. And as every co-angler or everybody who's ever team fished and gone in their partner's boat knows, you got to dig through everything and figure out what you're going to take. But I wanted to talk about 2 or 3 rods. So I just ordered some stuff out of Lews this year. I just ordered some new Lews stuff, and this is the rod. You know what? I'm going to pull something out to do a demo for you guys. I want to show you something on this rod and what I like in a frog rod specifically. So bear with me for 1 second. So talking about rods. I fished Cedar Creek last week, 2 weeks, and one of the things I kind of came to realize as I'm doing that is I like, and I knew this, I like long rods. A short rod to me is really about a 7 foot 2, 7 foot 3 rod. And that's fine and dandy till you start pitching around docks, when it really comes in handy to have shorter rods. But I fish Rayburn and Toledo a lot more than I fish a lake like Cedar Creek. So for those of you who don't know Cedar Creek, now there's a lot of offshore fishing done there most of the year, but this time of year it's mostly docks and retaining walls. So it's kind of close quarters, you know, hand-to-hand combat. And in those instances, it's probably generally a lot better to have a shorter rod than a long rod, especially when you're trying to skip stuff under docks. So I don't have as many short rods as I thought I probably would, so I'm probably going to order some shorter rods. But this rod, and you can tell I have literally worn the grip off this rod. This is probably the rod, the most versatile rod in all the rods that I use, and it's the Magnum jig rod. They make this rod in that series rod, and also in that series rod. By the way, I love that handle, and I'll talk about that in a second. But this particular rod is a 7 foot 3 rod. It's called a Magnum jig rod, and on the thing it says casting jigs, football jigs, swim baits, and wake baits. Now what I'll tell you is, for a football jig, I actually like a longer rod, because a football jig's way out there, and I want to have it's all about leverage, right? The longer the rod, the more line you take up, the better the hook set. But this rod, in addition to being a great swim jig rod, is my frog rod. It's the rod I really like frog fishing. Now, if I were frog fishing, in a giant lily pad field, I would probably go to something more like a Super Duty 3, because I want to pull more line in. But when you get to those longer rods, it's harder to work that rod up under you, and it gets really important what this length right here is, from the reel seat to the rod. And that's because you want to be able to work that rod under you and not be beating yourself up with the handle. And what I know is I really like that to be about 10 inches. So you can see that one's about 11 inches. Yeah, about 11 inches. That's what I like. That's the rod I really, really like right there. And so that rod is a moderate heavy, mod fast is the action. This is the rod that they've come out with as their frog rod. You can see it's still got the wrapper on it. I mean, I literally just bought this rod. And it is basically an identically laid out rod, 11 inches to the reel. It might actually be just a smidge shorter. Yeah, that one's probably closer to 10 inches, 10.5 inches. But what I'll tell you, this is just my personal preference. This rod is a heavy, fast action tip. This rod is a little bit too stiff for me for a frog rod. Now, I actually think I'll use this rod for a lot of other stuff. I'm gonna set it up for this tournament to be my jig rod. Now I know that's funny, but I'm gonna put cord on it, and I want something that I can really snatch those fish. If I get a bite up under a dock, I can really snatch those fish out of there. But to me, I like the more tippy rod, if you will, the rod with a little bit more pitching action. And to me, I equate it to, I can't hit a golf ball as far as I used to, but I'm still hitting a stiff shaft driver. I can go to a regular shaft driver and hit it further because it's got more action in it. I just can't control it. I lose it left and right more. I feel kind of the same way with my rods, but I want to have that little bit of additional flick when I, especially because this is the rod I use around cypress trees a lot. You guys have seen us do that a lot at Rayburn. I want something I can really flick that bait and make it skip up under that stuff. So in my mind right now, I like this as a frog rod, the mag jig rod, better than their actual frog rod, because this is a little bit too stiff to me. But I think there's going to be a lot of uses in that rod, and I think I'm going to order a second one because I like it kind of for close quarters, flipping around docks, around you know, brush piles, shallow brush. You guys know when I go to deeper brush, I like having that parabolic bend. But for shallow stuff, I think I'm really going to like that rod. So although they call it a frog rod, I'm going to call it maybe a better jig rod, and the Magnum jig rod maybe a better frog rod. Now you guys know I'm mostly Lews, but I had made a comment in a video 3 or 4 months ago about still not feeling completely comfortable with a big crankbait rod, and I've been using that Mark Rose series rod, that rod right there. So those are really good rods, but those are very expensive rods. Those are $260, $270 rods. So I was trying to find a rod on a little lower price point, because just like you guys, I got to pay for this stuff, right? And a viewer reached out to me and said, hey, I make a rod I think you'll really like. Now this is really funny. So this is his rod company is called Omega Custom Rods, and this is a composite rod, not something I've historically used. I've almost always used 100% graphite rods. This is a composite rod, and this is a North Fork blank. And what's interesting is when I was at Jones Trolling Motor probably 2 months ago, I've had this rod for a while and I didn't want to talk about it until I got to fish with it some, or a lot actually. And Michael Yoder, one of the owners of Jones Trolling Motor, saw this rod in my rod box, and he pulled it out and he goes, where'd you get this? And I said, well, a viewer, you know, and I connected, and he made me a couple rods. And he goes, he called Taylor over, one of the other owners there, and he said, Taylor, come here and look at this. And they started laughing. This is a blank that they love in a crankbait rod that somebody else made and quit making. And I apologize, I don't know who that is. But this is what I like about this rod, the composite rod is. Now, remember, I'm 59, be 60 years old this fall. Fishing's getting harder and harder on my body. And you young guys can laugh about that, because when I was young, I would have laughed about that. But this is so easy to throw a great big crankbait with. I have thrown a lot of Cloud 20s with it, Cloud 25s with it. I've thrown a 6XD and an 8XD. Now, I've not thrown a 10XD. Remember, a 10XD is a 2-ounce lure. I've not tried to throw that with this. I'm still throwing that with my 9-foot, that great big Mark Rose rod you've heard me talk about. That's the only rod I really feel confident with. Now, the guy who makes this rod tells me I can throw a 10XD on it. It just feels like it loads too much to me. But that's my personal opinion. I'll fish with it some this summer with the 10XD, and I'll update you guys on my thought. I just haven't had a chance to throw it with the 10XD a lot. I really like the split handle. I like the little bulb on the bottom of the rod. He's made it with, it's just a really well made rod, and it's not a real high price point rod. I told him when I got the rods, because he said, you know, he kind of basically said, I'm a custom rod maker. What do you want? How do you want me to make it? And I said this, and I didn't say anything about this. Now, this is one of the new, and this is only a $160, $170 rod. This is one of the new Lews rods that came out last year. And I was really into, I thought I had one in here, but I was really into the rod that had this in front of the reel seat, and it was very comfortable to me. But they changed that, and it was a brilliant move, because now I've got pretty big hands. You know, I'm 6'2", but it's so comfortable and it's so sensitive because you've got your hand literally on the blank. I really like this setup. And again, this is one of my Lews rods. So This is probably my favorite in front of the reel. But I gotta tell you, after fishing with this several times, and I've got another one of his rods in here that I've been using. Sorry guys, I'm highly disorganized right now. Way behind me. So this is another one that, although I don't like the look of it because it looks like it would be uncomfortable, I've actually found this to be pretty comfortable. So he uses basically a bunch of different types of, I don't know what you call that, but the piece that goes in front of the reel, and they're comfortable. Now they're not as small as that particular Lews rod, but you know, one of my few knocks on the Lews rods is this thing, because that starts biting on your fingers. And what you've seen me do on some of my rods is I will buy that stuff that's made by, I don't remember who makes it now. I'll post it right there at the bottom of the page, but it's made for tennis rackets. And you've seen on some of my rods, I'll wrap that sometimes. I just put 1 or 2 wraps around it because it makes it more comfortable. Because that will, this is not as bad as some of the old stuff, especially with when this was metal, but that will kind of chew on your finger a little bit. But I am really moving towards, and by the way, you see on that Lews rod, that frog rod I talked about, they've really made that super smooth now. But that, I'm impressed with his rods. You can see I've made that one in a crankbait, also as a crankbait rod. So that's a 7'2" rod with a fast action, and he calls it a medium heavy. So medium heavy fast action, and it's in my arsenal, and that's saying a lot when you have this many rods from Lews and other places. And matter of fact, that's another rod right there. That's a 6 cents rod. And that's one it's the Lux rod. I was at 6 cents one day and was just kind of going through the stuff and checking stuff out. I got by myself out there for a few minutes, and I picked this rod up, and I really like this rod. It's a 7.5 medium fast. Now, this is not what it should be used for. This is not the right setup, but I like this as an open water spinnerbait rod, open water swim bait rod as well. But again, you got the threads on the rod, which I don't completely love, but those don't bite on you, and I'll probably eventually cover that up with that wind grip as well. So that's the rods I want to talk with you about. I just want to share with you my experience on that mag jig rod versus the frog rod. I think I'm gonna continue using the mag jig rod as my frog rod, and I'm gonna use their frog rod as a close quarters jig rod. And you know what? I would also probably use it as a grass flipping rod because it's just stout. I mean, you hit them, you're gonna start cutting some grass out of there. Let's see if there are any other rods I want to talk about. Yes, I do. This is another rod. So they make a series now that you can buy that is full grip or is the split grip. And I will tell you, I like this a lot. I've been really impressed with this. It's very comfortable. It makes the rod a little bit butt heavy, but I gotta tell you, I like it. It feels kind of old school to me, way before the split grip rods. But I'm surprised how many Lews guys I'm seeing using that rod again. So if you want to try one of those, I'll put a link below. Actually, I'll put a link to all this stuff below. But again, for me, still to this day, the most versatile rod of all my rods is that Magnum jig rod. I probably have, I don't know how many rods and reels I have, but I probably have 4 of those Magnum jig rods. I have 4 Super Duty 3s, which is my A-rig rod, it's my football jig rod, it's a Carolina rig rod. And I have, Dickie got me on the Super Duty 2s. I think I only have 2 of those. I had 3 and I closed the rod box lid on one. So they're durable, but not when you drop a rod box lid on one of them. So, and then I got kind of an assortment of everything else. I noticed I have several, that rod that's called the Mag Bass. That's not what it's called. It is what it's called. The Magnum Bass Rod 3. I have several of those. That's and you can see that's a little square bill on there, but I have a bunch of those rods too. So if you have questions about Lews rods or any rods or my thoughts on rods or actions for fishing, please comment below or shoot me an email at kensmithfishing@outlook.com. And you guys know I'm a little bit of a homer about rods because I use a lot of Lews stuff, but you can see I'm certainly willing to branch out and try other stuff. And it's been, you know, I'm gonna use what fits the style of fishing I'm doing best. And love to hear you guys' thought on that as well. So sorry, I got a little scattered there for just a second. So thanks for tuning in. Thursday will be Cedar Creek practice from this past weekend for Bass Champs coming up this weekend. I hope you guys will tune back in and watch that and enjoy that. And by the way, I know I had told you guys we were going to Rayburn last weekend, and I was going to get 2 boat reviews done, but I had a sick baby, and we did not get to go to Rayburn, and that screwed that up. So I promise you we will get to some boat reviews. And by the way, so I'm thinking about my next boat. And as you guys saw when I went up for the dealer meeting, I drove briefly the Puma STS, which is a soft touch Puma, which is the one that Bass Cat widened. And River Lee has one. I haven't connected with River yet, but I know he's traveling with the tour right now. But I'm gonna catch him at Rayburn somewhere in the next month or so, and I want to go out and spend a day in that boat, and I'm gonna give you guys a review on the STS, because that's gonna be my decision point. I love my Lynx, but I might as well, I mean, I'm impressed with the Puma as well. It's got the same width. They say it's a little bit faster than this boat, which I don't need, by the way. This boat's plenty fast. But I'm just curious to take it out and take a spin. I think it's their biggest seller now, and might as well do a review on it since we have the access to one, and I think you guys will be interested. So we'll get the Puma STS done somewhere here in the near future as well. Thanks for tuning in, guys.